Good evening. We are so happy to have reunited here the brilliant team from Grey Gardens with the addition of the fabulous Patti LuPone for the musical War Paint, which is the real-life story of the feuding, pioneering cosmetics tycoons Helena Rubinstein, who is Patti, and Elizabeth Arden, who is Christine. These women never met, but there was such antipathy between the two of them that Helena never pronounced the name Elizabeth Arden during her life, and Elizabeth Arden always intentionally misspelled Rubinstein. When Helena learned that one of Elizabeth's prize racehorses had bitten off the tip of her finger, Helena said, "How's the horse?" So the show opened last summer at the Goodman Theater in Chicago, and it broke box office records there. And we've had a similar phenomenon happen here at Works in Process. This was the fastest selling ticket in Works in Process history, all due to the combined star power of Christine and Patti. We'll start with a question for Scott.
All right.
Okay. So has there ever been a musical in which two stars of this caliber, both of them two-time Tony winners, have appeared on stage together?
Thinking. Yeah, you know, the one that I kind of use as a touchstone is Chicago, with the original production with the great Gwen Verdon and the great Chita Rivera. So, I mean, some musicals just have one person over the title, and they're primarily the story of one. This is very much the story of the two women. So it creates a little bit of a different template in terms of how shows are structured and created, but I think Chicago is a good. Oh, and I would be remiss to not mention Wicked, also a two-hander with two powerful female performances.
Well, may you have as long a run as Chicago.
Yes, I'd be thrilled with either, frankly.
So each of the stars seems born to play their role. So how did you end up casting Christine and Patti?
You know, Patti and I have known each other for a long time and have never worked together. She seemed so perfectly tailored for the role of Rubinstein that it was absolutely on everyone's wish list. And then we started to think about the perfect oppositional foil for Helena / Patti. And we had all had such a very, very happy association, the four of us, with Christine on Grey Gardens. Another musical with two strong women, now that I'm thinking about it. That it seemed like a great and exciting pairing. The two ladies, if I'm not mistaken, have never worked together before.
No.
Have known each other socially and in the business for, I'm not going to put a number on it. Oh, let's say a long time.
Since we were mere infants.
That's it. And so that also seemed a kind of fascinating historical nugget to throw into the mix of them cast as two women who were wildly competitive with each other. Also, you know, Helena was an immigrant. She was a Polish Jew born in Krakow. Arden was a Canadian emigre who reinvented herself from Florence Nightingale Graham, her birth name, to Elizabeth Arden, and kind of fashioned herself in a horsey aesthetic, I think. But as you know, light and dark, taller and not as tall. You know,
traditional exotic.
Yes, exotic and waspy. You fill in the blanks. It seemed like the kind of perfect frisson between the actresses and between the characters they're playing. So that kind of, it was a meta dream come true.
Well, that's great. Well, Michael Greif, how do you make it possible for audiences to relate to these two characters? They're so over the top. They were uneasy equals of such male titans of industry as Henry Ford. I mean, they were more like willful Olympian gods than mere mortals. So how does an audience relate to figures like that?
Happily, I have the great help of this extraordinary writing team to provide beautiful, wonderful material to do that, and also these extraordinary actors whose real job it is to always humanize and to always show you every dimension of these extraordinary women's lives. So on the one hand, you get to really identify with the charisma and magnetism of these powerhouses. We get to see them smash glass ceiling after glass ceiling, and we really love that. But then we also see a lot of their human failings, a lot of their frailties. One of the first things that Patti and Christine and I talked about was how delicious it was going to be able to portray both the public selves and the private selves of these women. And I think that both of these extraordinary actors really, really go to extraordinary lengths to really show you these women at their most vulnerable, but also at their most powerful. So I think, seeing the range of all of that behavior is how everyone gets to identify.
On the powerful side, I mean, they really were almost, you said Olympian, but I was thinking almost Wagnerian in their largeness, in the fact that they were so accomplished and titanic in their fields at a time when women were not chief executives of corporations that bore their names. So it is, I think the music is also leavens and gives the human impulses and the softness, but we also fully embrace the large Valkyrie-ness of them. I'm thrilled by that part of it too.
Well, there is a lot in their biographies also that any female professional can still relate to. You mentioned the glass ceiling. There's still work to be done to have parity in the workplace. And the song that Patti and Christine are going to sing, which is from the beginning of the first act, called If I Were a Man, addresses some of these dilemmas and obstacles that they face being women in a man's world. So, ladies, that's your cue to sing.
All right. And some music stands would be most excellent as well.
Oh, we don't need them.
And some microphones.
Here they come.
Oh, okay.
I should say that this song takes place in the first act, as Amy mentioned. Both women are in different locations. They both suffered a personal deficit. Rubinstein with her major domo, and Arden with her husband. And they both sing and wonder a kind of commensurate thought about would their lives have such incredible speed bumps if they had been men.
And they're technological geniuses as well.
And here we go.
Oh.
Now we're ready.
I didn't even see that.
If I had my say, if I could wish time away and rewind my life somehow, who would I be now if I'd been a man? Nothing to lose, no role to choose, because a man on the move doesn't need to prove his worth, knows his place from birth since the world began. A man can set aside his feelings, be a shark in business dealings. Rise above the weak and small and reach for all he can. I, alas, am neither either or, and so my guy walked out the door. Could I bear it more if I'd been a man?
Though I made my name, became the tops at my game in a field I nearly own. Would I sleep alone if I'd been a man? I'd make the rules, suffer no fools, in full command of my ship, like a captain at the helm, monarch of my realm, master of my plan. A man can be an absent parent, stray the way of woman daren't, build an empire for his sons, and everyone's his fan. I love only men I can't caress, to sons ashamed of my success. Would they loathe me less if I'd been a man?
Not a chump, a contender.
If I'd been a man.
It's the curse of my gender. One man has half the balls that I have, rides the peaks and falls that I have. Why are they the proud and tall, and I'm the also-ran?
Though I've come a long, long way, I know.
And have the scars for it to show.
How far could I go if I'd been a man?
If I'd been a man.
If I'd been a man. Would I win if I had been a man?
Okay. I'm going to take this to this side. You take that to that side.
Thank you. Doug,
Yes.
our writer, why did you take on a dual story like this? You have two episodic lives, and I know the source material came to you that way, the dual biography, also called War Paint, and the documentary called Powder and Glory. But each of these women's lives have sufficient dramatic tension all on their own. So tell us why you made your job so difficult for yourself.
What you're saying is certainly true, Amy, in that both women were trailblazers and iconoclasts and merit plays and biographies of their own. But I think Lindy Woodhead's genius in writing a dual biography of them allowed her to not simply tell the story of a singular female executive in an era where there were none, but by telling both stories, she's able to tell us about the global rise of cosmetics themselves. And when you look at the history of cosmetics, inevitably, you're also looking at the social history of women in this country, how they perceive themselves and how they are perceived. And so I think by taking on both stories, she's able to really write the history of something that has now infiltrated almost every woman's morning regime. And I also think that it was our producer, David Stone, who read the book and saw in it the potential for a musical. And I think he realized that it's impossible to tell the story of Helena Rubinstein without invoking Elizabeth Arden and vice versa, because they were each the fuel in the other's engine. I remember working on a different play entirely, a play I was working on about Henrik Ibsen. I remember reading that he kept a giant oil portrait of August Strindberg over the typewriter, and he said, it's good to have your enemies watch you when you write. And I think that's how these women felt about each other. And when you look at the history of cosmetics, their rivalry ended up creating almost every single product you see on the shelves at Sephora. If Elizabeth Arden came out with mascara, then Helena Rubinstein would bring waterproof mascara to the World's Fair with 100 swimming ballerinas. And so, in essence, their efforts to one-up one another are what forged the industry and the incredible palette of products that you see today. So I think by telling the story of both women simultaneously, we're able to get to much larger truths about why we as a culture embrace makeup, self-invention, disguise, all the things that a woman's purse can carry and connote. So I think that was the genius of Lindy in writing the book and David in realizing its potential as a piece of dramatic material.
Well, that's a good answer. But I'm still... Okay, Michael, I'll try to give you an easier question. How did you manage to give each star equally good songs and equally good lines?
Oh, that's not an easier question.
It must have been a balancing act. Yeah.
Actually, every time you write a show, particularly after the first read-through, I would say the ubiquitous question is, whose show is this? Everyone ponders this issue. But in this case, it was very clear that it had to be both of their show. And I guess if there's a third character, it is the world they existed in and changed, and the world that changed around them. There was a wealth of material to draw from for the lyrics and the text, because they were both very witty, well-spoken women. They had tons of bon mots, many of which Doug uses, and many of which he makes up ones that sound just like they might have said them. And I do the same thing with the lyrics. I try and capture the flavor. And my grandparents came over from Europe. I was very familiar with the sort of inverted words that a lot of Jewish immigrants used. And even though Helena Rubinstein made an arc from Poland to Australia to Europe to America and had a salon in France and spoke French, you could still tell the roots in the way she spoke. And I tried to put that into the music, and Scott did as well. And with Elizabeth, who came from really a dirt-poor farm in Canada, and as Scott mentioned, totally reinvented herself, she kind of adopted a sophisticated parlance, the kind that you might have heard in the movie The Women by Claire Bluth Luce. In fact, a famous scene in that movie was filmed in what was ostensibly a salon very much like the Red Door Salon, which was Elizabeth's. So it was a very sophisticated kind of parlance, and maybe something like Miriam Hopkins. And so when you have those kind of challenges, those kind of definitions really, it becomes a lot of fun. And as far as equality, I think that together with the actresses, we were all very careful about not wanting to make it one for her, and one for her, and one for her, and one for her. We had to find a much more natural rhythm to the show that evolved from the drama, and not everybody's drama unfolds at the same way. People have their climaxes and crises at different times. So I think ultimately it works out, but not perhaps in the most even Steven expected way.
Well, we'll see about that. Doug, you had mentioned a minute ago about the idea of self-invention with these women, which works in terms of their own stories of their biographies, and also how they invented their face every day with the makeup. How do you separate the fact from the fiction with their self-invented stories? They were mythomaniacs. And what story do you stick with? And what do you fictionalize? And what do you keep factual?
Well, in a much more benign and comic way, one could argue that these women originated alternative fact. They both were true myth makers. And again, this is where, just as a writer, you're so gifted with this material, because of course you could argue that every woman in front of her makeup mirror every morning creates the public person that she wishes to be, and that's what these women did. And if the facts were inconvenient, they just altered them a bit. And so Helena Rubinstein sort of professed to be from lost European royalty, and Elizabeth Arden had a sort of Mayflower pretense about her, but neither of them were actually to the manner born. But makeup promised transformation for them and invited self-invention. And so in tackling the material, the most delicious thing, I think, is not to choose their version over the truth, but to try and create a narrative where we see them invent these personas, where we see them live up to these personas, where we see them fail in these personas, where they get called on these personas by people perhaps in the know. And so they're always balancing their very humble, very true, very earthy origins with the incredible high society, hot monde sort of fascinating, glittery lives that they led in New York culture. So I hope that the piece is always bouncing their true selves off of their invented selves. And it's certainly been a treat to watch Patti and Christine come to rehearsal with new nuggets of information about the women and start to integrate that into their work and then fold that into the text so they can build upon it. And so they were, in some sense, magicians, these two ladies, and hopefully the play reveals some of their more ingenious sleights of hand.
But Doug, I have to say that also we're neglecting to say that you are rather a magician, because the urban legend regarding Rubinstein and Arden is that they actually never met. So writing a play and writing a musical, and where the two lead characters have never met, I would say that you are actually the magician. We find, Doug finds very clever ways for them to have, because when you have, to my mind and ears, the two greatest singing actresses we have, we obviously want to hear them singing together. And if they're not in the same space, that becomes something of a challenge. So, Doug,
well, again, as a dramatist, you're always borrowing from your betters. And isn't it true that, like, Queen Elizabeth and Mary Stuart never really met, but that didn't stop Schiller? Without divulging any surprises in our narrative, that kind of constraint in a piece, in your storytelling, these two women can never meet, can actually be a delicious challenge that you can try and confront in a variety of inventive ways. So while it might seem like it's handcuffs for a writer, I think it's actually a wonderful, provocative invitation, and I hope that we've treated it as such.
Okay, Scott. You're composing the music. Doug is talking about what he's done with his words. How do you express the differences between these two characters, these mirror image characters, through your compositions?
Good question. I should say, we meet the women, we focus on the years when they were at the height of their powers in the mid-1930s, and we followed their trajectory through their decline into the mid-60s. So to a certain degree, I am a huge believer in referencing a sound of the period. So I think the 30s part, certainly without it being a pastiche, has a little bit of a 30s sound. And I think the 50s era, there's a number where the tempo marking, instead of allegro or lento, it's bongo-licious. And there's a bongo number that would not be out of place, perhaps in Judy Garland at the Palace. And you know, specifically for the women, because Rubinstein was clearly Jewish, without it being a stereotype, I think some of her material does delve more into a minor key, again, without hitting you over the head with it. And Arden, again, the more, although not actually patrician, but patrician wannabe, there's a little bit of a more streamlined, elegant sound. That said, as the piece goes on, and because Patti and Christine are so fluid in their instruments, I mean, you all probably, when you think of Patti, maybe the first thing you think of is that thrilling, incredible chest belt voice, like I did when I was, you know, watching Evita for the first time. And Christine, maybe the first thing you think of is a very lyrical soprano. And so there's plenty of that kind of singing. I also, and they can do it, we flip that on its head too. So sometimes Christine is belting and Patti's in the stratosphere. So it's incredibly exciting for me, the elasticity of their instruments and being able, as you just heard, I mean, they have phenomenal instruments and they have phenomenal ears. So the way that the character comes to life in the musical storytelling for me, I kind of can go anywhere I think is right for the characters, and they can follow musically accordingly.
Well, continuing this theme of these sort of separate but equal characters, for the direction, how do you direct two stars in a play where they have never actually met? And how does that also affect the set designs and every other aspect of the show? I mean, I keep thinking of those old split-screen 70s movies where you see one person on the telephone on one side of the screen and the person who's answering the call on the other side. Nothing's that literal. So how do you play with this division built into the show?
Well, as Doug mentioned, sometimes your restraints and your greatest challenges are also your greatest inspirations. I'm working with a spectacular design team of David Corrins and Kathy Zuber and Ken Posner, and each of them have had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time evoking each of these women's worlds. David has surrounded each woman with her most cherished objects. You get to see the things that the women love around them. Kathy Zuber has done the most extraordinary job of costuming them both so spectacularly and magnificently, but also so distinctly, so you get such an extraordinary sense of how different these women's personal styles are. We also have the wonderful opportunity, as Scott mentioned, of moving through the decades, so you get beautiful evocations of the 30s and then the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. But really what governs everything is, and I think we've also alluded to this, is how each of these women's journeys, although superficially so different, how many shared traits, how many shared qualities there really were, how they both reinvented themselves, how they were both really striving for acceptance into a society that in some ways was truly honoring them and in other ways was continue to exclude them and to treat them less than. We have a really great opportunity, especially in the musical theater, where music often, like an aria, is an opportunity to get inside the heads of these women, to also imagine ways in which the women might actually fantasize speaking to one another, where they might, in fact, theorize how each other might be their best advisor or their best confidant.
Well, we will see how these challenges are realized in our next song, called very cleverly, Face to Face. This is from the middle of the first act.
Without giving away too much plot, it actually closes the first act. Both women, we've seen them be incredibly competitive with each other through a variety of plot machinations. Both women actually fall afoul of the United States government and something called the Cosmetics Act of 1938, regarding what can and cannot be put into products and what can and cannot be formulated, claims of what these products can do. And it's after that slap down that both women, again, in the separate locales, posit in the very, very rarefied air, is it your enemy? Is it your number one competitor? Is that the only person that understands your predicament in a very specific way?
Strange how suddenly worlds can crumble, change forever the way things were. Her, my nemesis, and my lifelong rival. Now I need her advice for my survival. Would I dare to breach the wall of silence, both together in the same confusing place? There's so much I would wish to ask her, for who better to appreciate my case, reveal what's real beneath the war paint, just us two, talking face to face. Why endeavor to end the standoff? I have nothing to learn from her. She, my enemy, and my would-be equal, dueling actresses in our umpteen sequel. Though if only we could pool our knowledge, obsolescence comes at such a frightful pace, with chaos raining down upon us. Could we reach beyond the mirror, time and space, and wipe away the mask of makeup, just us two, talking face to face? Does she ever stare through empty air, vacant, lonely, regret how we came to share each other's one and only? Does she know how good I think she is enough to goad me, or get how I overcame the obstacles life showed me, or why I moved mountains, or why I crossed oceans, or put my ambitions above my emotions, the day I decided I would live the life owed me. Owed me. yet even so,
one wonders, you know, which impressionist is her favorite.
which French perfume does she prefer?
Could we possibly ever bridge the distance?
Fight united for once in coexistence.
Fight to obstinate to mend our fences. Life experience of facial can't erase.
We cling to our instinctive grudges.
Like two horses in an endless steeplechase. Or wipe away the mask of makeup just to talk.
Not to spur,
Man to man,
queen to queen,
on a par in our fall from grace, as we are star to star, standing face to face.
Really, really well. These two women were the original frenemies. Yeah. Christine, the meaning and relationship of makeup to women, the relationship that women have with makeup is very double-edged. And the musical addresses that subject in a very deft way. For example, the original suffragettes wore red lipstick as a badge of courage, and Elizabeth Arden was actually a suffragette. But later
Who
feminists...
supplied them with a lipstick?
Yes, yes, it was good for business, and I think she was social climbing a little bit with some of the society women who were suffragettes too. But she probably saw the beginnings of later feminism where makeup was rejected entirely. Can you tell us a little bit about how the musical deals rather deftly with this fraught topic of what women are supposed to do with makeup, beauty creams, the whole concept of hope in a jar?
Well, it's really interesting to just sort of chronicle the history of that, because really when Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein came to be, makeup was only used for prostitutes and actors. So they really changed the face of that because it was kind of looked down upon. And then when the suffragettes came about, and it was offered to them as a way of getting noticed, that it would sort of elevate their position by wearing red lipstick. And it kind of, in a way, that was the beginning of the transformation from a beginning to be thought of as something, you know, lowly to in a higher position. And in terms of the feminist movement, I mean, I think it always is a double-edged sword, because I know personally, I don't really like to wear makeup if it's not in a public way. So in a way, it's the way it was originally used for actors. I understand how it really, it gives you confidence, and it's a powerful thing in terms of being able to transform you into whatever character you're playing, or to transform you and give you some sort of protective coating if you're moving from a private situation into a public situation, especially if you're a public figure. So I think then that, and I think in a way, even if you're a public figure, I don't mean a public figure in terms of just in the workplace, that makes you public in a sense too. You're not just staying at home. So and I think in a way that it's very useful in that sense of giving you confidence and power and protection in a way. that without makeup you don't have. You're much more vulnerable and exposed. But I think that where it becomes the double-edged sword is if you only find confidence in wearing makeup and applying makeup. So that if the test is, or the challenge is for women, is to be able to find your own sense of self-worth and beauty and inner value without having to only experience it with makeup.
And by the end of the play, there's some kind of message there that...
There is a comment about
yeah.
that. Did we make them freer, or did we help enslave them? So.
It's a rhetorical question, I think. There's no answer.
Yes.
So, Michael, you have these characters who could easily be caricatures, and the story could become very quickly very camp and fall into parody. I mean, these lines, the real lines that these women uttered, such as Helena Rubinstein saying, "I am as extravagant in my anger as I am in everything else." And Elizabeth said that the only Elizabeth stronger than I is Queen Elizabeth. I mean, how do you prevent this just from going way over the top?
I have a lot of good help.
Yes?
I have very good writers and very, very fine actors who really are invested in showing you these women as real women and multi-dimensional women who have fought very hard and who have sacrificed a great deal to get to where they've gotten. And I also think that both of these women are particularly interested in debunking the myth that two powerful actresses can't share a stage with real generosity and grace. I think you've seen it already. That I think they're both invested in showing you that sisterhood is a lot more powerful than those old cliches about women having to compete with one another. But I'd love to hear that from them, too.
Well, I wouldn't ever allow Helena Rubinstein to become a caricature. She was a real person. She may have been a caricature to herself, to her family, to the people that worked in her office, but I don't think she ever thought she was. I think she was who she was, and I don't think the piece is not written in a shallow way. I mean, there is a lot for us to invest in and to find depth in. And they were human and they had flaws, and that's written. And I just don't think we would ever, either Christine, I'm sorry I'm speaking for you, Christine, but I believe that we would never ever betray any real character, be they extravagant or not, by making them caricature. I think that's unfair to them and unfair to the audience.
I tried really hard.
But to that point, Amy, they are prime for caricature because of the profession, because of their outlandish lifestyle, because of their extraordinary lives. But it's not as interesting. It's just not as interesting unless the playwright and the lyricist and the composer and the director have done this. They've written their flaws and their human frailties, and that's what's interesting.
And it's a lot harder to do. Yeah.
It's welcomed. Do you know what I mean? It's totally welcomed that we have that to play. Then you see maybe why they were so extravagant, maybe why they were in their anger. You understand their characters a little more.
Another way of distinguishing these two characters, and another thing that they had in common, was their very particular accents. And with Elizabeth Arden, she was born dirt poor and so desperately wanted to be part of WASP society. So she took elocution lessons and learned to talk maybe like an MGM version of a society lady. And with Helena Rubinstein, we mentioned she clung to this Polish accent in every language she spoke.
And she had an odd way of speaking publicly and then a different way in speaking privately. She had a very high-pitched voice when she was presenting herself, but then she had this other voice when she was just herself. It's so interesting. Do you know what I mean? She didn't trust who she was, clearly, in a public persona, that she presented herself one way and she was something else the other way. And I think that's true of both of them.
Yes, well, Helena probably used her accent to create this atmosphere of exoticism, which was a marketing tool.
She had a French inflection, a French accent in there. She had an English accent. I'm just surprised she didn't have an Australian accent in there. Because that's really where she learned how to speak English. Am I correct? She spoke Polish, and when she went to Australia, she learned. So she's not saying "G'day mate, how are you, Kaba?" There's no Australian accent at all in her voice at all, in her speech.
Okay, so how did you find that voice that could utter such lines as "there are no ugly women, only lazy ones"?
But it's a universal statement. It's a true statement, and it's and so it gets a laugh because it's recognizable. It's totally. I mean, I'm one of the lazy ones.
I don't buy that.
Oh, it's true.
Okay, but can you at least tell us how you made up this?
Well, we have a wonderful dialect teacher. We have a dialect teacher, Deborah Hecht, and then I listened to her voice when the Jewish Museum had the retrospective on her. I listened to that video of her voice, and then of course it's on, the Powder and the Glory.
Yes.
You hear her, and you can detect it. I'm not proficient enough to throw in the French accent, but I'm finding ways to put in the English inflection and the O sound, definitely the V for the W, and finding places in the script where when she is speaking, she's using that very high voice, which is so weird. It's interesting that well, as I said, and she wasn't in her body. If anybody saw that exhibition at the Jewish Museum, if you saw the video, I'll never forget this. She's talking to one of her clients about what they should do to their face, and she's standing to the right of the chair, and her body doesn't move gracefully out of the shot because it's being filmed. She turns just the opposite way, and when she's so not in her body either. She must have been all up here.
Well, she definitely had a brain, a formidable brain.
Yes, but physically, she was not in her body. So so of course you start to think, well, she didn't have sex. Well, she didn't like herself. You try to think of what makes a person turn just the opposite way to get out of, to get away out of, away from a chair. That's all great character study. That's what, when you were talking about the shallowness of there's just so much to these women that is so contradictory, so conflicted, so fantastic, and we were given the opportunity to delve into it and find it and maybe even make it up. It'll make sense, we think, right? Christine, right?
Yeah, I noticed that in her letters, her written English is perfect. There's no switching around of words in that.
Do you think somebody wrote them for her?
Possibly. I mean, she was such a...
Maybe Patrick O'Higgins wrote them for her?
Some of them earlier.
Oh.
Who knows? I mean, so much about her was fraudulent. You never know. And for the voice that you found for Elizabeth Arden, what did you listen to?
Well, I think it's just what you said. I'm originally from Illinois, and so I really try not to have my Midwestern accent. And I took elocution lessons when I came to New York when I was 20 years old. I'd come in to the school, and the teacher would say, "Good morning," and I'd say, "Good morning, she'd say, "Good morning," so she'd always imitate me with my Midwestern accent. So, I mean, I understand that, trying not to fall into that. So, but I mean, I think in terms of Elizabeth Arden, she had a very high-pitched voice, and it's not very theatrical. So I don't think that, and not most people didn't know her voice. It wasn't like doing Little Edie in Grey Gardens, where there's a documentary, and you have to be very sort of precise about that. So I think in a lot of ways it's more of an interpretation and just trying to work on the internal measures of the humanity of the character and make it sort of like a mid-Atlantic accent, which is what they did in Hollywood. Everybody spoke so beautifully and pretty much the same.
And no one anywhere else ever spoke like that.
No, but I really miss it.
But I miss it.
So, Doug, going back to writing these characters, apart from there having been these incredibly far-seeing business visionaries, they were very prescient about other things too. For Helena Rubinstein, that took the form of avant-garde art collecting and really clever purchases of real estate and jewelry. And for Elizabeth Arden, she was way ahead of her times in her early adoption of fitness and yoga. She stood on her head almost every day till the end of her life. And also, she infiltrated the all-male bastion of thoroughbred horse racing. So how do you work this other material into the musical when it's really about the cosmetics and the empire building?
Well, I think they're all linked, and I was especially compelled by Helena's interest in art and Elizabeth's interest in horses. And I think with Helena and art, both women wanted to achieve the very highest strata of American society, and clearly neither was to the manner born, and that was a problem. Because in those days, as we say in the play, for women to have money is fabulous, but to earn it is, well, a little bit vulgar. And so that was held against them, and so they used other tools at their disposal to achieve a kind of prominence. And for Helena, I think it was art, and she ended up bequeathing this remarkable collection of African art to the modern. And I was especially compelled by her interest in portraiture, because some of the greatest portrait artists of the day were commissioned by her. Salvador Dali painted her. Picasso did a series of sketches but never executed a painting. But a remarkable roster of painters. And that really struck me as we were working on the piece and as I was looking at all these remarkable images of Helena Rubinstein. And it finally dawned on me that these painters were able to do the very thing she promised her customers and failed to do, which was freeze them forever in time, give them a kind of eternal youth. René Boucher could do that, right? But she couldn't for all the salves in the world. And I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but we're especially fortunate to have Amy Fine-Collins as our moderator this evening, because she isn't just an expert in all of these things, but she's also a collector of some of Helena Rubinstein's treasures. And in fact, some of the portraits of Helena that appear in the play at critical plot moments are actually from Amy's collection. So she brings unusual a breadth of knowledge to tonight's topic. And as far as Elizabeth goes, horse racing was a way for her to ascend the social ladder. But what's especially poignant, and I actually, Christine, I think this is something that you brought to me and that you observed about her, and that now in our new draft of the play is even more prominent. But the one thing that connected her humble life on the Ontario farm and winning the Triple Crown were horses. her dad had an old nag in the barn, and she loved that horse. And that was when she was at her most humble. And when she was at her most elevated, she was on the cover of Time magazine because her horse had won. And so the one constant in a life that was always about serial reinvention was her profound love of these animals. And that was interesting to us too. So rather than having to find inventive dramaturgical ways to introduce those topics into their stories, instead those topics are almost impossible to avoid when attempting to realize these two.
So for Patti and Christine, these two women are heroines and perhaps even role models. And like all heroines, they must have tragic flaws. So what would you say were Helena's tragic flaws, and what would you say were Elizabeth's tragic flaws? Because we know they were not flawless.
Well, I think, again, this is a very sort of human condition that in the passion and the drive, the ambition of wanting to be successful, of wanting to be a part of a society that she wasn't born to be accepted by the world. And even though she was one of the richest women, certainly, and one of the richest people in the world at a certain point, I imagine that you might come up empty. So I think that's probably that was the tragic flaw, because she sacrificed her inner peace, in a way, I think, to achieve all this stuff, maybe thinking that that achievement would bring her the peace of mind. And I think that on a personal level, those things were lost. Those things were sacrificed.
And for Helena?
I think she had several flaws, and I think that must have started when she was quite young and rejected the man that her father chose for her, and was more or less banished from the family and sent to Vienna and then to Australia, suffered sexual abuse by her uncles, and I think she may have in fact developed an intimacy problem. She did love her husband, Edward Titus, but it was a strained relationship because they were on two different planes. He was intellectual and she was not. And so I don't think she achieved love. And I think that she accepted her position in when she came to America as never being able to be a part of the New York society. But I think that she also resented what was prevented to her as a woman and as a Jew. But I think initially probably it was love. She was not maternal. She was not maternal to her two sons. But I think, and then I think personally, I mean professionally, both of their flaws were their grandiose ideas and self-esteem, because they didn't move with the times, and they shot themselves in the foot by not advertising on television or understanding a potential competitor in Charles Revson. And they held on to an ideal that was not realistic at the time, in the late 60s when this was happening. But I think for Helena, I think it was love. I mean, she had people that she clung to for companionship, but they weren't her lovers, or
There's a male character that kind of represents that in the play, right?
Yeah, and it's It's based, loosely based on, well, there was one interesting thing that happened professionally for both of them when they had their salons next to each other. Harry Johnson and I think 11 of the marketing staff of Helena Rubinstein, and nobody knows why, left Helena Rubinstein and went to Elizabeth Arden. And then Tommy and Elizabeth got divorced, and Tommy Lewis went to Helena Rubinstein. And then just when we were in rehearsal in Chicago, Charles Revson was really, really the one that did the two of them in. In Chicago, Revson bought Elizabeth Arden. Just recently.
For
Revson.
$670-something million.
And then I haven't read Ugly Beauty yet. Have you read Ugly Beauty? Where L'Oreal bought Helena Rubinstein, and the
L'Oreal came from some of the Nazi
Nazi
Yes,
industries.
yes, yeah.
and her daughter, I don't mean to laugh, but her sister died in a concentration camp.
Right. This musical could keep on going and going
Yeah.
with parts 2, 3, and 4. But the musical is confined to just the 1930s through the 1960s. In the 1930s, the women were already rich and powerful and famous. But the fun part about this long span of time is that we get this fabulous fashion parade. Both women were avid consumers of clothing and jewelry. And Catherine Zuber, who was the costume designer, created the clothes to go along with this change of age, change of time, to show what's going on in the women's lives as time passes and their power grows and they age. So tell us, and I think some of the pictures back here, we've seen a few of her designs. Tell us how Catherine Zuber's costumes helped you get into character. Either one of you?
It's pretty easy.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, her costumes are flawless, and they're so true to the period that you feel like you're in it. You just feel like you're just right there in whatever decade you're being dressed as.
You know, there's almost, we wear rehearsal clothes in rehearsal, obviously, and then the costumes show up, and all of a sudden there's different body language.
Yep.
Because you're walking in a different heel, you are, in the 30s, you're constrained in a certain way, you're constrained in all of them. And constrained is not the right word to use, but you are filling a silhouette in a certain way, and it dictates. And she is so brilliant at design that we want to wear them. Do you know what I mean? We want to wear them as the women then would have worn them. You know, we wear hats. We have furs, gloves, and pocketbooks.
Don't forget the jewelry.
Oh, well, the jewelry's insanity. It's just crazy. But the fact that we have hats and gloves in every scene, and the gloves stay on when we are, you know, at tea or at dinner. And Helena bought a lot of jewelry, and she was interesting because she was a collector, but I think she was a bulk collector.
She was kind of, she was kind of a hoarder.
She was a hoarder, she was before her. If she liked the artist, she bought the entire collection. And they said when her collection of art was sold, it wasn't an important collection because each artist had maybe one or two pieces. It wasn't substantially important. There was so much of it, but within it there were only like a few pieces that were really of great value. But the jewelry, she started with one strand of pearls from that her grandmother gave her. And then I think it's Diana Moss, is it Diana Moss? Her great-granddaughter came to see the show and talked about the 5-strand of gray pearls that she wore with the grandmother. She would layer and then layer and then layer. And then she had on a charm bracelet, and I showed Deanna the one we had, and she said, "Oh yes, I remember playing with that in the Paris apartment."
She also famously bought a necklace every time she had a fight with tigers.
Right, I was going to say, right, she
Yes,
was
she called it makeup jewelry, except
Yeah.
she'd have a fight with her husband, and then she would pick out the piece, and then he would give it to her to say, "I'm sorry." She kind of orchestrated each step of that along the way.
Michael, Elizabeth Arden was an excellent dancer and a dance enthusiast. She marketed one line of lipstick, for example, by taking a troupe of dancers with her around the country dressed in all the different shades of lipstick that were in the line. So clearly there must be dance and movement in the show, not just music. So how was that worked into
Well, that little troupe was inspirational to us. And in fact, when the writers conceived of the worlds of Elizabeth Arden, they always included a dancing component. The very first time we meet Elizabeth is in a wonderful number called Behind the Red Door, and she's surrounded by thrillingly attractive dancing sales girls. And in every decade, we get to see the ways in which she has surrounded herself by these physical beauties. And the dancing styles change in the same wonderful way that Scott's music changes from the 30s to the 60s. We're very, very fortunate that Christopher Gattelli is our very extraordinary choreographer. And he's really able to evoke each of those decades perfectly, but also always manages to find the ways in which Elizabeth is surrounded by that kind of movement and that kind of liveliness.
Amy, before we break, as Doug mentioned, those of us who were fortunate enough to see the retrospective on Helena at the Jewish Museum were delighted to find out that a number of those portraits are in your own collection, as well as some of the furniture, some of the costumings, and we were curious, how did you become fascinated with Helena Rubinstein?
It's kind of an illness. And I'm not sure how I caught it, but I think she reminds me of my grandmother. And my grandmother was not as rich as she was, but she was more beautiful. And I don't know, I read the Patrick O'Higgins book, and I did a story early in my journalistic career on her, and I couldn't stop researching and finding these objects, or they found me, and really all I remember are the ones that got away. And I had a lot of people making a lot of fun of me for collecting because it made no sense. And finally, I was vindicated when that show was done at the Jewish Museum.
Yes.
Yeah. And you're providing further vindication now.
Yes. But I didn't know about the lucite chairs that matched the lucite bed.
Oh yeah, they're in my living room, and they belonged to Billy Wilder before they belonged to me. He bought them from the Rubinstein sale.
Wonderful.
Are we out of time? Okay. That is it, and there are no questions allowed.